Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us in the Information Security InfoSec Seminar. Today, we are happy to have Parul Khanna to give us an interesting talk about understanding data security, privacy, and risk management in cloud. Parul is working as a Senior Security Risk Advisor for Manus Global Wealth Asset Management Division. She graduated from MISAM program in 2016, served as GSA Treasurer, and published a research paper on doxing at Cybersecurity Conference held in Montreal. She has extensive experience working in fast-paced corporate environment in finance, IT, and insurance sector over the past 6 years. She brings a wealth of knowledge in cybersecurity investigations, data loss prevention, incident response, risk management, cloud security, and software engineering. Previously, Parul has worked as a core team member of Global Security Operations Center with Scotiabank. She serves as a subject matter expert on risk assessment, security control improvements, and security solutions. Thank you, Parul, for accepting our invitation, and thank you all for attending. Please, if you have any question, you can type it into the chat. It's all yours now, Parul. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Islam. And yes, thank you to the folks at the Concordia University of Edmonton for giving me the honor to speak before the audience today. I am honored to be doing this, to be presenting this session. And for the folks that do not know me, well, Professor Islam has just introduced me. I did publish my thesis as part of the MISM program under Professor Sergey, Professor Powell, and Professor Dale at an international conference. Right now, I'm based in Toronto, Canada, and I've had the experience of working in finance, IT, and insurance sectors over the last 6 years. So coming to the topic today, the session today is centered on discussing the fundamental cloud computing concepts, characteristics, and services. We will talk about the common threats in the cloud environment. We'll discuss on how data security and data privacy is achieved in the cloud. We'll also discuss about the risk management in the cloud environment. I will touch upon the certifications, resources, as well as the cloud security roles for folks looking to dive deep into cloud security. I will leave the last 10 minutes of this session open for the audience to answer any follow-up questions. So, coming to the topic, cloud computing, that's an extensively used term these days. What is cloud computing? So it's essentially the delivery of computing services over the internet, and which is otherwise known as the cloud. And then these services, they include the servers, storage, databases, networking, applications, threat intelligence, analytics, etc. A combination of all these services essentially helps us to achieve faster innovation, flexible resources, and economies of scale. So to put in another way, cloud computing is a way to rent the computer power and storage from someone else's data center. You can treat the cloud resources like you would have the resources on your own data center. And when you are done using them, you just give them back. You just typically pay for the cloud services you use, and then that helps you lower your operating costs, run your infrastructure more efficiently, and then scale as your business needs change. So, looking at some of the advantages of why do we need to move to the cloud? So, cost savings, we just discussed that it's essentially pay-as-you-go pricing model. You just pay for the services you use. On-demand availability, this means that the computing resources are made available to the user as needed. You don't have to ask assistance from the IT department to complete the process. So it's more like a self-service thing. You just have to simply reach out to your provider, and then they will process your request. So it avoids the unnecessary delays and provides the flexibility for the pay-per-use or the self-service. Easily accessed through a broad network, and then this means that you can access your resources, your applications hosted in the cloud through a large pool of devices, such as your laptop, mobile phones, tablets, and etc. So every smart device that you can think of, you can access the resources. Resource pooling, this is an interesting concept with the cloud computing. It gives the multiple users the capability to share the resources, but without exposing them to the security risks. In other words, privacy is retained. So let me take a stab at it and simplify what exactly this means. So imagine that you have a building housing hundreds of individuals. So though they live in one infrastructure, they are still able to keep their privacy because they live in separate flats. The tenants of the building, they share the same amenities provided by the same infrastructure, and this is essentially what resource pooling is all about. In the cloud, the computing resources such as your servers, storage, databases, software, etc., they are the ones that are pooled so as to serve a multitude of users. Elasticity and scaled rapidly. Now, this is necessary in cloud computing in order to keep up with the demand. If an application exhibits large volumes of traffic, service will not be affected because additional servers will be automatically provided. So elasticity simply means that the cloud can be immediately provisioned or released. Cloud can immediately provision or release the services depending on the needs or the surge in demand. Measured service. So cloud has a meter that measures, monitors, and controls the resource usage. So what's the benefit of this? Well, this encourages transparency and is a guarantee that the users only pay for what they actually use. In other words, the amount users pay, they vary according to how much they consume of the services being delivered. So having discussed like these advantages of the cloud, let's take a step into the real world and see what's the application of these advantages. Now, we all know that there is a spike in the sales during the Black Friday, Boxing Day, and the holiday events. So the sheer volume of customers and the transactions greatly exceeds all the normal operations throughout the rest of the year. And when this happens, retailers who offer online shopping, they can see great benefit from hosting their sales capabilities in the cloud. That's one of the practical application of it. The cloud provider, they can provision the resources necessary to meet this increased demand and will charge for this increased usage at a negotiated rate. So that's simply an amazing and wonderful concept, and it puts the resources to optimum use when the demand surges. Looking at some of the benefits of moving to the cloud, again, the list over here, this is not exhaustive because it depends on your organization needs, your business requirements, and depending on that, the benefits may vary. So flexibility. Well, cloud offers vast storage space, multitude of solutions, and plenty of customizable options. So this helps improve not only the employee efficiency, but also the customer satisfaction. In COVID-19 crisis, the organizations has definitely accelerated the adoption of the cloud computing. So the increased volume of the employees working from home using conferencing and collaboration services, the increasing traffic on the networks that connect users to these services, and people leveraging these services. So cloud computing, it has got it all covered, and it is inherently designed to handle the fluctuating demand. Reliability. So that means that if your one server is down, you're still able to access your data as another server will take its place. This means that your resources will be kept safe at any time. Good investment, yes, definitely, because it's pay as you go the price model. You don't have to spend on the physical equipment, utilities, maintenance, and other pertinent expenses. So your operating costs is significantly minimized. Environmental advantage. So with everything going digital these days, you don't need a lot of hardware upfront or the physical products. So definitely your business will help reduce the environmental waste. And this will likewise help decrease the production of the paper wastes as well. Increased collaboration and improved efficiency. So cloud computing definitely makes collaboration a very simple process. Team members can view and share the information easily and securely across a cloud-based platform. And some cloud-based services even provide collaborative social spaces to connect the employees across the organizations, therefore increasing interest as well as the engagement. Now, it's important to understand the basic models offered by the cloud to the customer depending on the business needs, because why is it crucial for you to understand this is once you actually step into your real world, like to an industry, And if your organization is using the cloud services and you are asked to assess the risk, you have to know about which model your organization is leveraging and then the security considerations associated with those models. So just briefly describing the three kinds of service models over here. Infrastructure as a service. So in this model, the cloud provider simply supplies the underlying infrastructure and the clients are responsible for managing the aspects such as your applications, runtime, middleware, and data. The client does not manage or control the underlying cloud infrastructure, but has control over the operating system, storage, and the deployed applications. So what's the advantages of infrastructure as a service? Well, there is reduced cost of ownership. There's no need to buy the assets for the everyday use and the reduced cost of maintenance as well as the support. And then there's optimum use of IT resources and the systems. Platform as a service. The consumer does not manage or control the underlying cloud infrastructure, including your network servers, operating systems, or the storage, but has control over the deployed applications and the possible configurations, settings for the application hosting environment. This platform as a service, it's useful for the developers that they can build upon and use to create customized applications. So all servers, storage, and networking, they are managed by the cloud service provider while the developers can maintain management of the applications. And then this platform is delivered via the web, giving developers the freedom to concentrate on building the software without having to worry about the operating systems, software updates, etc. Now, some of the advantages of leveraging platform as a service includes there is multiple hosting environments and flexibility. There's a support for the multiple programming languages and frameworks, thus enabling the developers to code in whichever language they prefer or whatever the design requirements specify. It's simple, cost-effective development and deployment of applications. It's scalable, plus it's highly available as well. And then developers can customize the applications without the headache of maintaining the software. Software as a service. Now, this software as a service represents the most commonly utilized option for businesses in the cloud market. It moves the infrastructure, your platform, and all the support for the application and its data to a third-party hosting provider. So this eliminates the need for the IT staff to manage the network, infrastructure, hardware, software, etc. And instead, all these tasks, they are handled by the hosting provider. So all the customer has to do is access the application via the internet, as well as they just need a laptop and the internet to access the application. Now, some of the advantages of using software as a service includes the associated capital expenditure is removed and replaced by a pay-per-use licensing model. There is reduced support costs because the customers save money on the support issues because the relevant cloud service providers handles it for them. There's automatic updates as well as patch management. The user is always running the latest version and the most up-to-date deployment of the software release, as well as any relevant security updates. There is standardization and compatibility. So all users have the same version of the software release. Now, some of the significant providers for this software as a service, they include Dropbox, your Office 365, Salesforce, GoToMeeting. Now, diving a bit deeper and then looking at the security considerations for these models that we just talked about, they are prone because it's important to understand these models as well as the security considerations once you actually step into the real world. So talking about them, VM attacks. Now, your cloud servers, they contains tons and hundreds and thousands of virtual machines. So once a virtual machine is compromised, virtual machines on the same physical network, they can attack each other because they share the same hardware and the software resources, including memory, storage, device drivers, etc. Hypervisor attack. So let me take a brief step back and explain what an hypervisor is. A hypervisor is known as a virtual machine monitor. It allows one host computer to support multiple guest virtual machines by virtually sharing resources such as the memory as well as the processing. And then because multiple virtual machines can run off on one physical server with a hypervisor reduces the space, energy, as well as the maintenance requirements. So coming to hypervisor attacks, Malicious hackers consider the hypervisor a potential target because of the greater control afforded by the lower layers in the system. And then compromising the hypervisor enables the control over the installed virtual machines, the physical system, as well as the hosted applications. User access management. Now, user access management, this is one of the very critical concepts. It helps to protect your availability, integrity, and confidentiality of who accesses your assets, your resources, and your information. And then key components of access management, they include administration, authentication, and authorization. So administration essentially is the ability to perform the onboarding or changing account access on systems and applications. Authentication is confirming your own identity using your username and password. Authorization is granting access to the system based on policies, rules, and attributes. So it's where the principle of least privilege and need to know come into effect. Protection against malware, backdoors, and trojans. So a backdoor refers to any method by which an unauthorized user is able to get around the normal security measures and gain high-level user access on a computer, system, network, or a software application. So in the past, we have seen case studies where attackers have utilized embedded and hard-coded malware as a method for obtaining unauthorized access and then retaining this access for a long and extended period. And most notably, these malware, they had been placed in front of point-of-sale devices, handheld card processing devices, thereby divulging large amounts of sensitive data, which might include credit card numbers, customer details, PII, etc. So code reviews and other software development lifecycle checks, they are essential to ensure that the likelihood of malware, backdoors, trojans, and other potentially harmful vectors is reduced significantly. Data access and policies, that's again a subset of your user access management. And it deals with having the correct implementations and repeated assessments of the security policies for accessing the data. Now, one of the challenge associated with your data access and policies is to map your organization's security policies, processes, and standards to meet and match the ones provided by the cloud service provider. So that's one of the things, and we will dive a bit deeper into that. Web application security. Security vulnerabilities within the web applications, they carry significant and potential impact for the enterprise. So the cloud services, they essentially rely on a robust, hardened, and regularly assessed web application to deliver the services to its users. Hence, it's important to ensure the security of web applications. So I'm going to digress here a little bit and put more emphasis on the web application security by mentioning the OWASP Top 10. So OWASP Open Web Application Security Project, it's a regularly updated report outlining the security concerns for web application security. So I encourage the students to go through the OWASP Top 10, read about them. There's like plenty of tutorials, plenty of content on the internet available for this. And why is this important? Because let's say if you are hosting an application or if you are leveraging the cloud services to host an application, now for that application, if you go through, now that application has to go through a penetration testing report. And if that penetration testing report comes out with all these critical vulnerabilities or of all these top 10, then you have to address them in your while doing the assessments or while doing the risk assessments for that application. So I'm going to pay special emphasis on insufficient logging and monitoring over here. So the insufficient logging and monitoring, that is huge thing when it comes to an organization, because that coupled with ineffective integration with the incident response, it allows the attackers to further attack the systems, maintain the persistence, and pivot to more systems, tamper, extract, or destroy the data. So it's important to have logging and monitoring mechanisms in place. Again, there's plenty of content on YouTube as well as other resources. And at the end of the slide, I have listed resources where you can actually study about the OWASP top 10. But this is essential if you are understanding your cloud services or the risk associated with your cloud services. Now, Coming back to the deployment models offered by the cloud services, again, this deployment model, this section is heavily influenced by your organization's risk appetite, cost compliance, as well as your regulatory requirements and legal obligations, along with other internal business decisions and strategies. So describing them briefly, your public cloud is open use by the general public. It may be owned, managed, and operated by a business, academic, or government organization, or some combination of them. It exists on the premises of the cloud provider. Your private cloud, that is provisioned for exclusive use by a single organization comprising multiple consumers, example, business units. And that may be owned, managed, and operated by an organization, a third party, or some combination of them. And it may exist on or off premises as well. So a private cloud is typically available only to the entity or the organization, its employees, contractors, and selected third parties. And they are typically more popular among large and complex organizations with legacy systems and heavily customized environments. Now, in recent emerging trends, hybrid cloud has taken over. So hybrid cloud is a composition of two or more distinct cloud infrastructures. Example, private cloud, community cloud, or your public cloud. So that's hybrid cloud is gaining in popularity. It enables the organizations to retain the control of their IT environments, and then coupled with the convenience of allowing the organization to use public cloud service to fulfill the non-mission critical workloads, and then taking the advantage of flexibility, scalability, as well as cost savings. Now, community clouds, they're a recent variant of the hybrid clouds, and they are built to serve the specific needs of the different business communities, especially the ones which have shared concerns. For example, the mission, the security requirements, policy, as well as compliance considerations. So let's dive a bit deeper and talk about the most significant cybersecurity threats for your cloud networks that the businesses face when they are migrating data or applications to the cloud. Again, take note here that this list is not exhaustive because the cloud security threats, they're always evolving. So data breaches and data loss. Let me distinguish these terms. So data loss, it refers to the loss of information, deletion, overwriting, corruption, or integrity related to the information stored, processed, or transmitted within the cloud environment. And data breach is the exposure of personally identifiable information, such as your name, date of birth, social insurance numbers, to unauthorized or malicious entity that could result in significant harm. Now, data breaches may require mandatory breach reporting to your relevant agencies, and then significant fines can be imposed on the organizations that cannot illustrate the sufficient duty of care or security controls being implemented to prevent such data breaches. Now, DLP has been an ever-increasing trend with the organizations. I have worked previously with one of the top 5 Canadian banks and can't stress the importance of having a DLP program that protects the organization's proprietary information. You've got DLP tools such as Semantic, Secure, Check Data, TrustPoint. So there's plenty of DLP tools available. So go ahead and study about them. It's a very interesting and challenging field to be in. Account or service traffic hijacking. So this is not a cloud-specific threat, but it arises due to the phishing. So essentially, this allows the attackers to monitor and eavesdrops on the communication, sniff, and track traffic, capture the relevant credentials, access, and then alter the account based on the user profile characteristics. Insecure interfaces and APIs. So what's an API? An API basically allows applications or the components of applications to communicate with each other over the internet or a private network. And then for users to access the cloud computing assets and resources, they utilize the APIs made available by the cloud service providers. Now, there may be a case when the developer has not developed an API securely. And as a result, these interfaces are completely open to the internet, and anyone can use them to access the enterprise systems and the data. So think of it as if you're walking around a neighborhood and you're trying the doors until you actually find one that's unlocked. So this can result in the credentials being passed to the third parties or consumed insecurely across the API and relevant stack components. Denial of service. So you must be familiar with this in your practical labs. DOS attacks, they prevent the users from accessing the services and resources from a specified system or location. And then this can be done using any number of attack vectors available, but they typically look to target your memory, buffers, network bandwidth, or the processor power. So now, when you are leveraging your cloud services, availability is the main concern because everything is hosted in the cloud. So you want to make sure that there is no single point of failure, and your contract should state that there is a redundant server or a backup location in case a DOS attack is successful. Malicious insiders. Now, people, processes, and technology. They are the three key components or the three key assets for any organization. So people tend to present the single largest challenge to the security due to the possibility of a disgruntled or a rogue employee, or simply, an internal careless employee or a contractor who is exposing the sensitive data maliciously by accident or on purpose. Abuse of cloud services. Now, attackers are increasingly using legitimate cloud services to support their activities. For example, they might use a cloud service to host disguised malware on sites like GitHub and then launch DOS attacks or distribute the phishing email, mine the digital currency, execute automated click fraud, etc., or like even the brute force attacks. So cloud service providers, like when you are leveraging the cloud services, you should make sure that the cloud service providers should have mitigations in place to prevent and detect abuse or misuse of the cloud services. And it's also important for the cloud providers to have an effective incident response framework in place to respond appropriately. Shared technology vulnerabilities. Now, cloud service provider, they share infrastructure, platforms, and applications among tenants and potentially with the other providers. So wherever possible, the providers should implement a layered approach as well as defense in depth to secure the various components. Now, talking about the threats to data residing in the cloud. Obviously, when we leverage the cloud services, there's threat to data as well. So unauthorized access and unauthorized usage. Now, unauthorized access, that happens due to hijacking, due to hacking, improper permissions in a multi-tenant environment. And unauthorized usage, that pertains to like the data storage can be manipulated into unauthorized usage, such as the account hijacking or uploading the illegal content. Liability due to regulatory non-compliance. Now, specific controls like encryption, they might be required to ensure compliance with certain regulations. We will cover laws and regulations briefly in the next coming slides. Theft or accidental loss of media. Now, this threat applies to portable storage, but as cloud data centers grow and storage devices become smaller, there are increasingly more vectors for them to experience theft or similar threats. Improper treatment or sanitization after end of use. This is challenging in the cloud computing because usually we cannot enforce the physical destruction of the media. Data leakage and breaches, we talked about them briefly in the previous slides. So consumers should always be aware that the cloud data is exposed to the data breaches, or it can be from an internal employee or a cloud service provider employee with respect to your storage or the access permissions. Corruption, modification, and destruction of data. And then again, this can be caused by the various sources like the human error, hardware or the software failure, and events such as fire or flood or intentional hacks. Again, to emphasize, this list is not exhaustive. There are other attacks as well, like your malware attacks, your software-related attacks. All these they pose a pertinent threat to the data residing in the cloud. Now, let me take a stab as to how things we just talked about are going to help us in the real world. So if your organization is leveraging the cloud services, you need to be familiar with the risk associated based on the service model that we just talked about, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, etc. The deployment models, whether it's a public cloud, private cloud, etc. And then there are some generic threads that we just covered pertinent to every cloud environment. Next, you need to think about the data. Who has access to it? What about the DLP policies? For how long the data would be stored? Data, the threats related to the data, what controls are put into place to protect that data. So looking forward to the data security technologies that we have in the cloud to actually protect the data. So DLP. Now DLP, as we talked about earlier, it describes the controls put in place by an organization to ensure that certain types of data, example, your PII, confidential, or your internal use only data, they remain under the organization controls in line with policies, standards, as well as procedures. So again, to emphasize, DLP, it's an increasingly gaining traction with the organization. It's a very interesting and challenging field to be in. And there's plethora of DLP solutions available. There's like TerraMine, Checkpoint, Digital Guardian, Secure, Trust DLP, etc. So an effective DLP contains discovery and classification, which is essentially you classify based on the data categories. Example, regulated data, credit card data, public data, PII, internal use, etc. There is monitoring, so that has to be done for both the ingress, which is your incoming, as well as your egress-based traffic, that is the outgoing traffic. So effective DLP strategies, they monitor the usage of data across all the locations and platforms, which includes your endpoint devices, your gateways, your servers, your Bluetooth, USB, etc. Enforcement. Many DLP tools, they provide the capability to interrogate the data and compare its location, user transmission, destination against a set of policies to prevent the data loss. So if a policy violation is detected, specified relevant enforcement actions can automatically be performed. So again, an effective DLP solution should look at all the effective ways the data loss can occur, your clouds, printers, ports, uploading to Gmail, etc. And the effective DLP policy should be looking at all the points mentioned on this slide. Like at the minimum, it should be addressing all these policies. So think of it that, yes, if you have to prevent a data loss, you should be thinking about these, especially when you're moving to the cloud. Now, talking about some more data security technologies, encryption, we do have encryption that we can leverage. So pay attention to your cryptographic courses that you have, because that comes in handy when you'd actually talk about encryption. For the data in motion, we can leverage IPsec, VPN, or the TLS. And for the data at rest, it's based on the design of the software. A single file can be encrypted, a partition can be encrypted, a folder can be encrypted, or an entire drive can be encrypted. Key management, that's an interesting component with regards to the encryption implementation. So access to key storage, the backup and replication of the keys should be taken into consideration. Throughout the life cycle, cryptographic keys should never be transmitted in the clear. So they should always remain in a trusted environment. Lack of access to the encryption keys will result in lack of access to the data. And then this should be considered when discussing the confidentiality threats versus the availability threats. Masking and obfuscation, anonymization, as well as tokenization. So the ability to use the encryption is not always a realistic option for the various reasons, including your performance, your cost, your technical abilities. So as a result, additional mechanisms need to be employed to ensure that data confidentiality can be achieved. Now, data masking or data obfuscation. So that's the process of hiding, replacing, or omitting the sensitive information from a specific data, especially PII. Data masking is also widely used for test platforms where suitable test data is not available and we are using the prod data. Now, anonymization, that's the process of removing the indirect identifiers to prevent the data analysis tools from pulling the data from multiple resources to identify individual or sensitive information. Tokenization, That's the process of substituting a sensitive data element with a non-sensitive equivalent referred to as token. And the token is usually a collection of random values with the shape and form of the original data placeholder, and it's mapped to the original data by the tokenization application or the solution. Again, moving to some of the best practices in the cloud environment, the cloud provider should ensure that all devices in the data center are secured. Like there's hardening mechanisms that are followed. All the guest accounts are removed and all the unused ports, they are closed. There is no default passwords, and then there is a strong enforcement of a password policy that's in place as well. That's very important. Any admin accounts, they are significantly secured as well as logged, especially if they contain higher privilege or if they have access to the sensitive data. All unnecessary services, they are disabled. Physical access is severely limited and controlled, and then systems are patched, maintained, and updated according to the vendor guidance on a regular basis. Now, looking at some of the best practices from a BYOD's perspective, where you are bringing your own device, such as your smartphone, to access the sensitive data in the cloud. So your device should have the remote wipe or the remote lock capability in the events of loss or theft, with the user granting written permission to the organization to wipe lock via a signed authorized use policy, just in case if the device gets stolen or whatever. Be protected with some form of anti-malware or the security software. Utilize some form of local encryption. Be secured with a strong access controls, for instance, a password or perhaps a biometric or like in a multi-factor authentication configuration. Have and properly employ the VPN solutions for the cloud access. Have some sort of data loss, leak prevention, and protections, which we just talked about before, your TLP solutions installed and your data loss policies in effect. So the organization may also want to consider the containerization software options for personally owned user devices as a means to isolate their personal data from the organization's information. So again, there should be a blend of your like the layered defenses, such as your defense in depth, which is the practice of having multiple overlapping means of securing the environment with a variety of methods. And then these controls include a blend of your administrative, logical, technical, as well as the physical controls. Again, I would like to mention over here that it's not only the physical devices that need to be hardened when you're looking at leveraging the cloud services. We have to think about the virtual devices in the same manner that we would consider the physical counterparts, because cloud computing, it relies so heavily on virtualizations for scalability and load balancing. So now, one of the things associated with storing data in the cloud is for how long the data that needs to be retained in the cloud. So there should be a data retention policy in place as well. Now, the data retention policy should be at bare minimum should include the following. There should be a retention period. There should be applicable regulation, like in the event of a conflict, which local regulation or which law would be enforced. There should be retention formats as well. There should be a proper data classification in place. There should be retrieval procedures as to how the data is going to be restored. There should be monitoring, maintenance, and enforcement that we talked about. So, and then since everything is hosted on the VM and your cloud, the physical destruction of the media is not applicable. So that leaves crypto sharing as the sole pragmatic options for the data disposal in the cloud. What is crypto sharing? Crypto sharing is the practice of deleting the data through the destruction of the cryptographic keys protecting the data. Again, when you are studying your cryptography courses, pay attention, because that really comes heavy when you are looking at the security controls for your data security while moving to the cloud. So moving further, talking about the data privacy in the cloud. So privacy is most commonly associated with the confidentiality of personally identifiable information. Now, the data security best practices we talked about earlier, they gel with achieving the data privacy in the cloud. So typical considerations to be taken include what information in the cloud is regulated under the data protection laws, who is responsible for personal data in the cloud, whose laws applies in the event of a dispute. There should be a proper documentation for this. Where is the personal data processed? For the privacy breaches, there should be an incident response for handling it, and who is responsible for protecting the privacy. Now, looking at some of the best practices to achieve the data privacy, and as we talked about these while discussing the user access management as well as the DLP, there should be segregation of roles as well as the appointments. There has to be training and the instructions. Authentication, authorization, we did cover them, spoke about them in the previous slides. Control on the time validity of assigned authorization profiles, the personal data breach management plans, and your incident response plans. Logging and monitoring, so log activities according to the criticality of personal data. Again, logging and monitoring is a huge thing, because without this, you cannot hold a person accountable as to who did it maliciously. So logging and monitoring, that's really crucial. Data retention control according to the purpose of processing, again, for how long the data needs to be stored. Now, the data is often, now under cloud computing, at times there happens that the data is processed or stored in multiple jurisdictions, and then there's like overlapping jurisdictions. So this means that these organizations are responsible for complying with the local privacy laws as well as privacy laws in the other jurisdictions. Now, I have pivoted my discussion over here to the privacy laws we have in Canada. Now, in Canada, several factors determine as to which laws applies and who oversees them. So is it a federal government institution? Is it a provincial or a territorial government institution? Is it a private sector? Is it engaged in commercial activities? Is it a federally regulated business? Where is the organization based? So looking at the privacy laws we have in the Canada that are enforced by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, we have two of them. There is this Privacy Act. So the Privacy Act applies to the federal government institutions listed in the Privacy Act Schedule. It applies to all the personal information that the federal government collects, uses, and discloses. And this includes the personal information about the federal employees. And then have PIPEDA. So PIPEDA sets the ground rules for how the private sector organizations collect, use, and disclose the personal information in the course for profit commercial activities across the Canada. PIPEDA stands for Personal Information Protection and Electronics Documents Act. So just to step back over here, the data security as well as data privacy, they go hand in hand with each other. Data privacy is a huge thing. At the end of these slides, I have listed some of the privacy certifications that folks who are looking to dive deep into data security as well as privacy, they can pursue. So that's data privacy is like a huge, again, with the organization, it's a huge thing. So one thing to note over here is that PIPEDA, it does not apply to organizations that operate within Alberta, British Columbia, and Quebec. Now, these three provinces, they have their private sector laws that have been deemed substantially similar to PIPEDA. Now, if you're interested in knowing what your organization or what your institution, which privacy laws is applicable, just go to your Concordia's homepage, make a search for the privacy, and it will bring a whole section of the privacy policy that your organization follows. So for your institution, we have the Personal Information Protection Act. So that is Alberta's private sector privacy laws. It protects the personal information of the public employees of the organization operating in Alberta. So moving on, just there, a time check. Okay. This slide lists down some of the laws and regulations that you should be knowing about. So read about them because they do come in handy when you are actually working within an organization. There is GLPA, which deals with the financial services sectors. There is GDPR, which deals with the PII of European Union residents. Then PIPEDA, we talked about. There's PII of the Canadian residents. There is PCI TSS, which deals with the credit and debit card records. So having a knowledge of the data privacy laws as well as the other laws and regulation is also important as a cybersecurity professional. Now, Moving towards the end, talking about the cloud computing risks, they can be essentially categorized into main categories. Six main categories. So policy and organization risks, they are related to the choices that the cloud service consumer makes about the cloud service provider. And to some extent, they are the natural consequences of outsourcing the IT services. And outside the IT industry, they're often called the third-party risks. Data security and regulatory risk. Now, this may be because of there's a data leakage from a malicious insider. There's unauthorized data access by the service provider. There's lack of flexibility for encryption, data control. There's lack of visibility into the cloud operations and the ability to monitor for the compliance. Technology risk, well, there could be limitations on the customizations of the service offerings that's offered by the cloud, or there could be a limited choice of technology as well as the related tools. Operational risks, these cover the service reliability and the uptime. So it's control over the application availability and the disaster recovery. There could be a lack of service level customization. Vendor risks, now these pertain to the association and reliance on a service provider. So often the case, like it could result in provider lock-in or the provider exit. So provider lock-in, that refers to the situation in which the consumer has made significant vendor-specific investments, and now these investments can lead to high costs of switching between the providers. Provider exit refers to the case where your cloud service provider has just gone bankrupt or is out of operations. There is supply chain risks as well associated with the vendor, and then recently the SolarWinds supply chain attack is one of the it's one of the most potentially damaging attacks that we have seen in recent times. So what happened in this was the attackers, they were able to add the malicious code into the company's software systems, and then that created a backdoor to the customer's information technology systems, which the attackers then used to install even more malware that helped them to spy on the companies as well as the organizations. To read about this, you should be knowing about the breaches as well as the risks associated, so everything. These financial risks, then these pertain to underestimating the initial cost. So in some cases, you might be unknowingly, your organization is able to carry the capital expenditures of the hardware as the software, of the hardware as well as the software. So, or there could be additional overhead of the managing service providers. So you should be familiar with those. Now, essentially, the management of the cloud computing risk, that can be categorized into four broad categories. So risk identification, that's the process to identify all the risk. Risk assessment and analysis, it's to determine your likelihood and impact on the business objectives. So you understand the data flow diagram, you understand the use cases, the architecture diagram, know the encryption levels, etc. You assess based on the cryptography, identity and access management, the retention period, all the threats and all the terminologies that we covered in the previous slides. That comes handy when you do a risk assessment. The risk mitigation or the risk response, again, looking at the risk controls that can mitigate the risk for you. And then risk monitoring and reporting. This one is required to continuously monitor the IT risks and controls in place to constantly evaluate the effectiveness of the risk management strategy. It also covers reporting to the stakeholders. So moving on, looking at some of the certifications that you can do if you are more interested to pursue or to gain more in-depth knowledge on cloud security. Again, CISSP, that's a gold standard certification. If you have this certification, you should literally be able to speak up to any role, any of the different roles or the professions within the cybersecurity, any of the different streams. That really, really is a gold standard certification. CCSP, Certified Cloud Security Professional, is another gold standard certification for cloud security. The CRISC, that helps you get into a risk advisor or a risk assessment roles, because you essentially know how to manage the risk and how to assess the risk. More importantly, it's a great certification. there is some fundamental CCSK as well as CCAK. So both are from the Cloud Security Alliance vendors. So CCAK is fairly new. That's the Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge. Again, there's vendor-specific certifications like Microsoft, AWS, and the Google Cloud. So once you move into an organization, and if you know which clouds provider your organization is leveraging, you can go for the vendor-specific certifications. Looking at some of the privacy certifications, International Association of...
Please 2 more minutes to have some time for questions.
Okay, sure. Yes, I will. Thank you. So privacy certifications, they are, again, International Association of Privacy Professional that has CIPP, CIPM, and CIPT. So anyone who's looking to get more information, just visit that website, or then feel free to reach out to me. CDPSC is, again, one of the ISACA's gold standard certifications, Certified Data Privacy Solutions Engineer. I've listed some of the resources, and I will encourage Professor Aslam to share this deck. So these are freely available resources. Now, I would like to pay emphasis on the ISC Square blog. This study was conducted recently in April 2021, and it lists down the top 10 technical skills in demand with respect to cybersecurity in the market. I highly encourage folks to go through this research study. Just for curiosity, cloud security is the first skill on this list, followed by data analysis and monitoring, and then risk assessment is the 5th one on this skill. So please go through this research study. It's freely available on this blog. And then looking at some of the roles that folks can get into, I started off my career as a data loss prevention analyst. So yes, that's a huge demand. And right now I'm into a risk advisor role. Cloud security analyst or the system architects are some of the roles that you can get into. If you need further information on any of these, or if you want to know the skills, yes, please feel free to reach out. And my apologies if I have been over time. So yes, I'll leave the floor open for the audience to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Parul, for this interesting presentation. So we have a question from Tayo. Will you give us your slide after the lecture?
Yes, sure. Yes, I will hand over the slide to Professor Aslam, and yes, this can be distributed to the students, or yes, it can be for sure. Yes.
Yeah, great. And the session is recorded as well. Yes. From Dr. Sergey, what would be the one most important career-related advice you can give to the graduating students?
That's a very excellent question, and thank you, Professor Sergey, for that question. So, looking back 5 years down the line, I would say go ahead, start looking at the jobs, know the skills they ask for, know the certifications they ask for, know the tools that you use. For instance, if you're going towards the field of DLP, learn about the different tools. There's plenty of tutorials. Know about the SIEMs, because like Splunk, QRadar, etc., there are different sorts of all these SIEMs. Know about them and be ready to speak up during your interviews. So an interview, the organizations know that, okay, if you are able to demonstrate your critical ability thinking, if you are able to demonstrate or walk through like a troubleshooting scenario or an incident response scenario, if you know the process is in place, add to it the certifications that you are working for, plus your education. That's the most crucial and the foundation to it. Definitely, I would say that you would be able to land into a cybersecurity role. So start looking up the job descriptions and then work towards it. One of the good ways to do that is you have a beautiful research thesis program. So let's say if you pick up a research on one of the dimensions of the cloud security and you are able to speak up to that in an interview, that clearly shows that you have experience and you are leveraging that to your knowledge to get that job. So yes, start working towards everything. And you have mentors, you have excellent professors, you have your faculty, you have the alumni. So feel free to reach out. Just don't hesitate to ask questions. Everything is okay as long as you ask. So.
Great.
Okay.
Can you see Mitchell's question?
Yes, I can. So has there been a big integration in the direction from using SIEMs towards the mostly AI machine? Great point, great question. To answer the first part, I haven't seen a very great integration as of yet today with the organizations of moving towards AI, but who knows in the future, yes, we would be leveraging that. Or are SIEMs still used with AI machine learning as another avenue of alert incident generation? So yes, SIEMs they do utilize an inbuilt mechanisms to simplify your log analysis and to correlate all the raw data for you. To some extent, yes, they utilize the components of AI, but have they been totally dependent on the AI? Well, the answer to that would be no, because it's still like we are still getting more data, and as we are still most of the organizations they rely heavily on SIEM. So I would say yes. Just know the different SIEMs that we have and then study about those, because there's plenty of tutorials for them.
Okay, great. Any more questions? Okay, great. So again, thank you so much. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Parul, for your interesting presentation, and thank you all for attending. We will not have seminars for the next 2 months. Our next seminar will be next September as a part of Q's 100th anniversary events. So please visit Q's 100th anniversary website to see the interesting history of Q, and for upcoming events as well. I will share the website in the chatting box. And also in our School of Management, we will have a golf tournament on July 22nd. And this is the website of this interesting event. So you can have a look. So we hope that you enjoyed today's seminar, and have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eslam, if you stick around till